I think meritocracy emphasizes more of a very selfish idea that you become better than others. You beat others. Like now in any school, we're always beating others. The top 15%, top 5%, everybody can be top five if we redefine it. Everybody can be or should be, the bottom five, because it depends on the spectrum of merit you want to measure.
Hello and welcome to the Human Restoration Project podcast. My name is Nick Covington. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this episode is brought to you by our supporters, three of whom are David Nuffel, Darren Yushinowski, and Janet Clark. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. We're proud to have hosted hundreds of hours of incredible ad-free conversations over the years. So if you haven't yet, consider liking and leaving a review in your podcast app to help us reach more listeners. And of course, you can learn more about Human Restoration Project on our website, humanrestorationproject.org, and connect with us everywhere on social media. In a 2021 interview, Michael Sandel, author of the book The Tyranny of Merit, argues that if merit can be understood as competence, a good thing to be clear, quote, the principle of meritocracy, simply put, says that if chances are equal, the winners deserve their winnings, end quote. But as we grapple with meritocracy, or the systems built around that idea that those who get ahead are deserving, he says, quote, what makes merit a kind of tyranny is the way it attributes deservingness to the successful, end quote. And how are we supposed to understand the great problems of our time? The United States' incredible wealth and income disparities, child poverty, life expectancy gaps, infant mortality, student debt, or even incarceration rates through a lens of meritocracy. Sandel offers, quote, to rethink meritocracy requires, among other things, rethinking the mission and purpose of higher education, end quote. But what about educational inequality and the construction of affluent white suburban public schools as, quote, good schools, where the social and economic advantages of their proximity to wealth compound upward into greater property taxes, more funding, smaller class sizes, more course offerings, and higher test scores and higher graduation rates? That's a lens my guest today, Yong Zhao, Distinguished Professor of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies and Educational Psychology at the University of Kansas, wants to expand into redefining the purpose of K-12 education more broadly, from meritocracy to human interdependence. He's co-authored an open access piece for the ECNU Review of Education by that name that you can search yourself or find in the show notes, and it's the focus of our conversation today. They write, quote, meritocracy's focus on ranking individuals according to flawed metrics fosters unhealthy competition, overlooks diverse human talents, fails to account for unequal starting points, and ultimately hinders both individual fulfillment and societal progress. We propose an alternative framework, the human interdependence paradigm, which emphasizes cultivating unique individual greatness, realizing it through applying it to solve meaningful real-world problems for others, and fostering a sense of purpose and mutual reliance. The human interdependence paradigm for education aims to create learning environments that promote collaboration, social intelligence, and ultimately a more equitable and flourishing society, end quote. And you can email Professor Zhao at yongzhao.uo@gmail.com. It had been so long since we talked for the podcast last. I went and looked at the podcast thing. It was February 2020, which
I know,
is like, my
it's
God.
like 5 years, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And like a microsecond pre-COVID too, right? So
Yeah.
if we think about everything, the world has shifted since then. And then
Well,
to
we
sit
have
here,
shifted, right? You have shifted. I mean, look, this last 5 years, it's great change for you,
Oh, it's yeah, it is wild to think like just where I mean this work was at, and then
Yeah.
now to I guess put front and center the language that you guys use in the piece. I've got it printed off here with all my notes on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moving from meritocracy to human interdependence, redefining the purpose of education. I mean, I saw the title, I was like, I have to, reach out and pick Yong's brain about what influenced this and where did you and your co-author take
Uh-huh.
it. But I'm wondering for the audience's sake, I mean, 5 years have passed since that past conversation. If we're going through the HRP archives, like we talked a bit about how we've changed here at the organization, but what have you been up to? What have you seen in those trends in your travels to Slovenia and beyond in the last 5 years, Young?
Well, I mean, I think over the last 5 years, COVID was definitely, significant. But the second significant was probably the emergence of generative AI. I mean, and the widespread. I think, and of course, with the the wars, human conflicts have increased, political division. You see, society has become completely disrupted, and also, if you remember before COVID, before 2020, the human society was very different than today, and I would say today you see a lot more anxiety, you see a lot more depression, you see a lot less hope, you see a lot more, economical downturns, upturns. I think you see all this disruption. I think at the same time, you look at the schools, there's also general recognition of the lack of success of traditional school reforms. And, if you look at test scores have not gone up. Achievement gap has not been closed, as I kind of predicted almost 10 years ago. You won't be able to close. And also, you see the rising, actually, achievement gap is increasing. And you also see the rising inequity among humanity, right? The family income, that's a big problem, and division of, the wealthier gets well, the wealth gets wealthier, the poor get poorer, the disappearance of the middle class. So a lot of those things really have, I think, shaped education. Unfortunately, right now, I think schools are at a loss many times because they have to be subject to the increased control of governments, through standardized testing that unfortunately has really settled in schools. If you go anywhere talking about school change, everybody references the state tests, and it's Nick, it's quite interesting to watch that. The education reforms over the last 3 decades has always been about what I would call centralized decentralization. We centralize testing, centralize accountability, the way allow every school to have their own power to decentralize to do whatever they have to do, which is really sad because if you control testing, you're basically driving schools to do that. And no matter how decentralized you are, you're in essence centralized to commit to one common goal. And that does not work in age of AI. So anyway, the article you were referencing to, from meritocracy to human interdependence, is meant to point out the obvious that a traditional education paradigm which everybody seem to have accepted, is about meritocracy, is about human competition in a very narrow field without accepting that people have different talents, different interests, different contexts, different family backgrounds. And that is actually what education's ultimate problem we have to solve, is because AI is also recreating a world. If we want a better world, we want better future creators. That's our students today.
you pointed out so much tension in the system just through that phrase, the centralized decentralization. It's almost set up so that way schools can't ever change. So then they'll get docked in the standardized tests, and yet they're given the freedom to, change if they should so choose. But there's a ton of counterintuitive, I don't know, nonsense in there along the way. And what I see you pointing to here is maybe that the meritocracy, or as you call it and define it, as you call it out in that piece, expressed in education systems is sort of the root both of the tension and of the negative side effects. I guess how have you seen meritocracy directly related to, these negative trends that you see, right? Both with declining test scores, increasing anxieties, um, gaps, all of those things. How, in your mind, is meritocracy like at the root of those?
Well, I mean, if you think historically from Plato, the philosopher king in the West, to Confucius in the Chinese way, says the best educated go serve the government. In education, practically has practiced sorting students for a long time. And of course, you don't have to care so much about, like 2000 years ago or even 300 years ago, because at that time, only the wealthy, the privileged could have access to education. And emperors, kings, they were sorting people into those leadership positions. So they used to train the governor and the governed in that sense. But the modern education followed the same idea, in essence, that is trying to say, okay, some people deserve to go to better schools because they have merit, or they have more merit than others. So the high score, students who perform well academically go to Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Princeton, and the others go to community college as a graduate from high school, and then we redistribute resources that way. But so that's why, in the 1950s, the Michael Young wrote the book The Rise of Meritocracy, to criticize meritocracy. And he was actually right as a satire. But unfortunately, and the rich, the privileged, happily accepted that, to say that, we have merit, we deserve to be in better positions. The merit is defined, right, as intelligence plus effort, as if that has nothing to do with the family background, with community. And so this is a very unfortunate thing. So meritocracy was a bad idea, but has been embraced. So today, even the poor people accept that. I'm not good at school, therefore I don't deserve. So when you think about test scores, in essence, is a reflection of the traditionally defined merit. It's that your math, your reading, your social studies, your science, without counting other things. That's why, one of the things I said, the achievement gap can never be closed, because you are measuring achievement based on a few subjects, and which favored the more privileged than the immigrants, than the disadvantaged, than the people who are in remote areas. We did not think about that. So now with standardized testing, if you look at test scores, we're always punishing the disadvantaged. I mean, it's still very much today, test scores is a reflection of your family background than anything else. So this is why I think now, with the widely accepted meritocracy, we continue to sort people in that way. But again, with technology, with this modern society development, we don't need to do that. If you look at how many YouTubers have become wealthy, if you look at Instagram, I'm not necessarily endorsing any of this. I'm just pointing out the useless can be useful. So why would a school stick to the idea of sorting people and pushing people into competition, rather than focus on developing individual uniqueness, individual talents, individual passions, so they can work to support each other? And another big part in the article, our thinking is also about you know, your value has to be realized through creating value for others. Like you guys doing the HRP, you're in essence creating value for a lot of people, for the community, for students, for teachers. And when you create value, you have value. I think meritocracy emphasizes more of a very selfish idea that you become better than others, you beat others. Like now in any school, you know this, we're always beating others. The top 15%, top 5%, everybody can be top five if we redefine it. Everybody can be or should be, the bottom five, because it depends on the spectrum of merit you want to measure.
Yeah, in any kind of league table, all other things being equal, someone has to be first and someone has to be
Exactly.
last.
There's no way to avoid that. And another thing is that people think, oh yeah, you have merit because you have intelligence, you work hard. That's not true. A lot of the so-called merits do not necessarily come from so-called intelligence or work hard. A lot of
Mm.
people work hard. A lot of people are smart. They don't never get the chance to do that.
One note that I wrote in the printed off version of the article that I that I read and took notes on was ringing through my head that old quote from Stephen Jay Gould. I'm probably paraphrasing, but he says something to the extent of, "I'm less interested in the folds of Einstein's brain," right, as an appeal to that IQ part, as the people of equal talent that have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops, right?
Exactly.
Changing that vision of from the ranking and sorting lens of meritocracy, which I see being as twofold. It not only keeps us trapped in like a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
We're always only allocating or rationing a scarce resource, whether that's college admissions or school finance or any of those other things based on these particular outcomes. But then the scarcity mindset becomes self-justifying of meritocracy. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
you get trapped in like this negative spiral, right? Where you say, oh, the only way to do X is Y, and the only way to do Y is X, and you can never break out of this paradigm. And I guess what I'm asking for you, Yong, is how do we transcend, the meritocratic paradigm? I don't know, in both in school and society. Do we need to do one or the other, or how do you see those things intertwined?
Well, Nick, I think the first thing is, through conversations like this with you, I hope, we will be able to spread the idea that meritocracy is a false statement. It doesn't really exist, because that's something people have accepted as a fair way to judge people, as a way to justify that your kids are doing better than my kids, or my kids are doing better than yours. I think that's first need to do, to say the fallacy behind the concept, meritocracy. I think that's the first thing we need to deal with. We need to confront that idea that's been so well embedded in our culture. We need to rethink about that. The second thing, I think, schools, or actually our human society, needs to really embrace the idea that human beings are diverse, and the diversity matters. That diversity means everybody has a jagged profile of talents, that no matter what you do, no matter where you are, you can be on, we call top in some way. So you are great in some way. Every student is truly talented. I recently wrote an article several years ago, said the rise of the useless, because we have arrived at a time, if you can create value, psychological, physical, whatever value you can create for others, you can become valuable. But our schools have not accepted that. I think our schools are still stuck with the idea of merit. Whatever the school subjects are, we think there's merit, in that regard. So we need to change that. And the third thing is, schools need to change curriculum. If we want to help everybody to become best in their own way, we have to create opportunities for everyone to become best in their own way. Many years ago, I joked about it. I said, no, I want to go sue school district. Why do they force my child to learn math, but my child only wants to learn music? I mean, why can't you create opportunities? So I think that's something the curriculum shifting, and of course you have to move towards assessment. If we need to rethink about assessing individuals instead of comparing them to a group. I think you mentioned Stephen Jay Gould, who's really talk a lot about human the human instinct to rank people. That's why standardized tests came about. We really want to rank people, and which we don't really need to. But actually, I was thinking about this. Ranking is so pervasive. Like you take your child, your baby, to a pediatrician. You want to know height. My child is like 95%. But what if your child is bottom 3%? What are you going to do? I mean, really, but what are you going to do? Somehow we think height matters. I mean, so I think all of this we need to change assessment, because in the age of AI, we need to completely reimagine the idea. I just actually yesterday I just had a new book published. We can talk about this book next time. It's called "Fixing the Past or Inventing the Future." So this is let me actually send this to you. So it's really talk a lot about, in the age of AI, we need to completely rethink. Like John Dewey always talk about education, recreate the society. If we want a different society, we need to recreate education.
Oh, yeah. Again, another note that I wrote on this, I wrote like John Dewey, right? Because that's what it made me think of. And I worry, that this reimagining towards human interdependence sounds very Deweyan. Dewey in his own time, right, was criticized for not necessarily having the practical to match up with his sort of idealistic or the pragmatism that he was talking about at the time. And this is where I think I so appreciate your perspective, Yong, just being international, being global, having traveled and seen so many educational contexts as you have. Where or from what contexts or classroom practices or systemic education models have you seen that, in your mind, have shifted us closer to this ideal model of human interdependence as you envision it?
Well, I've been experimenting programs in China, in Australia, in some U.S. schools, in different, even some work in Canada, in Argentina, different places. I think the program I've been running in China, with actually my co-author Rojun Zhong, is called ICEE, Innovation, Creativity, Entrepreneurship Education, which really has three basic principles. One, personalization of learning. It's not personalized learning, it's really personalization. Make learning personalizable. So you give students agency, you give them autonomy so they can exercise self determination to decide what's worth learning instead of trying to prescribe him what's worth learning. And in the age of AI, that's completely impossible. Number two is we call problem orientation, that we want all teaching starts by asking students to find problems and solve problems. Learning to find problems, learning to solve problems is probably the most important skill that we all need in the age of AI, is asking the right questions. But schools don't teach that. Then the third one is human interdependence, which is about you finding and solving problems for others. So you show a care. So this is actually interesting, because schools teach kids to become selfish. We know everybody is self-interested. Selfish means you want to gain your best interest right now. But self-interest is really you will gain what you need by offering something to others. That's much more rational. That's much more far-sighted. So that's so we've been running this experiments for 8 years. We've been using AI. We also run a summer camp in China to encourage students to pilot the three possibilities. And there are many schools do this, but I have not seen many schools education paradigms trying to emphasize human interdependence, to say you create value for others. Like we have a theme we call explore me through we, or understand me through we. If you want to know yourself, you have to be known in the context of others. Like Nick, you cannot be Nick without others. You just, well, I don't know what you would do. Just is your existence is defined by others.
There is so much on the spectrum from radical individualism, or maybe the rugged individualism, the held up as an American ideal, and some radical form of collectivism on the other side. We need to learn to ride the interdependence between these two things, seeing the individual in light of the whole, and the whole in the light of the individual.
Yeah,
One
even
way, yeah,
individualism, right? I mean,
yeah.
some individualism are self-destructive. Right? I mean, so you want even individualism to rise, for the benefit even of individuals, right? I mean, some individualism are completely self-destructive. If you're so selfish, without thinking about others. So I think our education is really trying to think about how to recreate a potential society where we would not to say I am better than you say I'm better than you in some areas, and my betterness is to help you, and your betterness to help me. I think that's the big shift.
A nation of rugged individuals, or if we're all just independent contractors out here seeking our own zero sum benefit to everybody else, is not a society at all. It's just different warring fiefdoms.
It won't work. I mean, if you look at our society today,
Yeah.
I mean globally, I don't mean even the America. Not many countries do, now are accepted from political or cultural division. I think right now, if you look at the US and other places, we basically have come to a place of unsustainable. Our societies, if you look at the income divide, if you look at how the culture, religious, in everything, division is not what human beings need, but human beings must find a fundamental economical and cultural way to exchange your strength with other people's strength. How do we create value for you? So education has to advance more in that direction. But again, to do so, we need to change our curriculum. We need to be more personalized.
One interesting way that we're trying to address this with schools and teachers that we work with is, so much of our attention gets focused on shifting assessment practices away from, say, a test and move on, or test and forget model, towards one where you're curating portfolio artifacts and reflections, and an instructional model that matches it by trying to move away from, say, a prescripted curriculum, that's moving at a certain pace and scope and sequence, where you're accumulating that knowledge over the course of the year in theory, towards one that is more open-ended or project-based, problem-based, place-based, all these based education models. And the other thing going alongside this that frankly we've run into as one of the biggest mindset shifts in the system is really from a model of like classroom management, which again implies that there's some sort of hierarchical structure, that the teachers are managing the kids, to one that we've called community resilience and stewardship, which really we think flips the model away from this idea that, again, who takes care of us, right? Well, we take care of us, not the teacher doles out punishments and rewards and everything like a B.F. Skinner in his laboratory or something to all of us lab rats in our desks, but one in which we contribute positively to the culture. And when one of us is harmed or ill or falling behind, it makes all of us less well. And so we need to wrap our arms and support around that person, not necessarily view it as a deficit and say, oh, this is my chance to finally get ahead of that person now that they've taken a sick day or something. But those are where I've kind of seen those three shifts happening, right? Instruction and assessment, but also in this classroom management piece. I'm curious how you see that too.
That's very powerful because in our model, when we work with students, we always ask them if they are in a state. They come from different countries. For the summer camp, they can be once they're in a dorm. The first thing they have to do is negotiate a contract with each other. When they're in a classroom, they always negotiate a contract and they revise that because everybody has to learn to manage themselves. Everybody has to learn to contribute to the community because, again, that contribution is not altruistic. That contribution is self interested because you want a better environment. What would you do? What would you, and you also have to say it has to be agreed upon. Like when this summer in Beijing, we had students from Australia, from Hong Kong, from different cities in China, about 200 of them. You know, in the storm at night, some students began to order food because in China, speed delivery, like DoorDash kind of things, go fast. And then that actually puts pressure on other students because now you can have extra food, you can invite others to join your food. Some students may not have the money, they may not want to do it, so the summer camp decided, okay, we should ban this. But the next day we banned, and then we had a big meeting with everybody to discuss this, to say, what do you think, what should we do? We also kind of safety reasons. If you go out at night, pick up your food, there's a 12 to 18-year olds. I mean, in the end, every different dorm has their own plan. And, adults also have a role too, because, we have supervisors and, well, if you drag us into this at night, is that fair? So it's a very longer conversation about who we are, what we want, when do we sacrifice personal things, when do you actually enhance the community, what's better. I mean, I think a lot of times schools don't involve students making those decisions because they may not even be aware of all the implications, the possibilities. Once you become aware, you might be different. So I like what you said about your classroom management.
And I'm not even sure which one enables which, right? It's just as we've been working in this with schools to ask the questions like, why aren't these shifts in assessment and instruction really right taking root, or what's sort of the barrier there? The thing that we landed on was like, whoa, we have to change our whole perspective of this interaction and why we're here and why we're doing this. Like, what's really the purpose?
Well, I mean, I think, Nick, another thing you're asking about what I learned, over the years. Another thing is politics and the money. Politics and finance, I think, play a very big role. It's not only about good educational ideas; it's about good political ideas. Because politics or politicians want votes. So, like right now, for example, in the U.S., a lot of state houses are debating about the science of reading. Or, I mean, America has been overread for a long time. As the most developed country, we're still debating about reading. It's ironic concept, right? Really, why? It's a lot of money involved in reading. A lot of money involved. A lot of votes involved in reading. I mean, that this is a lot of times. So you and I can talk about great educational ideas, but we need to think about the political ideas. When would politicians come out to talk about human interdependence? You might see some there. I think there will be a few politicians who would like to. They are talking about that, but not by any chance in the mainstream yet. But we need to think and talk about this.
Yeah, there's the idea of, sowing seeds in fertile soil. We gotta, I don't know. I'm always grappling with this, Young. Like, is this a chicken and egg problem? Do we change the schools to change the society, or do you have to change society to change the schools?
I think you need to change both. You need to
Yeah,
treat them as both. And now you have eggs and chickens. You got to deal with both. You know, you got to deal. But I would actually be interested to say, if you get your teachers in your Michigan schools and even students to read and paraphrase the article I wrote, how would they respond? What would they do? Because I think students are creative. I think teachers are creative. They're all innovative people. How are they going to react? I'm actually curious what they would create. I bet they will come up with good solutions.
Oh, that would be so great. And I'll let you in here too into one of the conversations we were having the other week with schools there about how projects are going and everything else. And one of the teachers that we were working with, I'm not talking out of school or anything, so I think this is okay. Had mentioned they're like, well, what if for the next one, for this next project, we let students ask and answer these questions. If the conclusion we're coming to is that kids might not be engaged or have a lot of buy-in with this adult designed project, maybe the solution is to have kids ask and answer them to generate engagement and buy-in. And that was a solution that they came up with, in their own regard, in their own right, to this problem of perceived lack of motivation with the current project as it was. And
Well,
it was just one.
that's very smart. Teachers
Yeah.
came up because in all our programs, we never want to impose questions on students. We want them to be the one to ask that. We want them, like project-based learning's failure is imposing the projects on students. Because students, no matter what you think, if they're not interested, there's no intrinsic motivation. So in our program, where I said personalization, problem orientation is that students have to be the one to pose questions, to find problems and justify why it's worth solving, why it's valuable. So I think that's your teachers came up with something great. I really
Yeah.
believe teachers, when given the autonomy and opportunity, they can do. And students come up with wonderful questions.
And I'm thinking about that, what you said about chickens and eggs. We've got chickens and eggs and we got to deal with it. And I'm thinking about the program that you were talking about situated there in China, where I mean, they have a high stakes, college admissions situated in, a different ideals, perhaps from an American lens of meritocracy, but they're there. That scarcity and meritocracy is there nonetheless. How do Right. I'll flip the script and ask you then, how do students and the adults in the society in China perceive, you know, the way you're turning things upside down on it?
About 8, 9 years ago, we're working with probably the best school. It's called Chongqing number 8 secondary school in Chongqing. Chongqing is a city of like 31 million people. It's huge. And the school is really historically the number 1 test score school. They're really they got over 20,000 students, and but we did not want to change the entire school. So when they approached us because they see the problem with test taking. Their students may have great test scores, but they are not necessarily happy, not necessarily purposeful, not necessarily, you know, service driven, all those. So we said, well, we want to work with your willing parents, willing students, willing teachers. So we developed this school within a school model. We explained, and then they allowed us to pilot with 120 students first, and then we changed a big part of the curriculum, allowed more personalization, problem finding, human interdependence development. Now they actually have spread this to several thousand students. And so we started by, actually, we do this a lot in different countries. We always do school within a school. And we had a school in Western Australia. They have been successful in transforming the school within a school. So don't try to change everybody. Once Nick, you reach certain age, I don't have time to convince everybody. You want to start with those who are willing. And in education, no one model serves all parents, all students. But actually, that's another problem in our public schools. You are the monopoly. Let's say you're in Muskegon. You're in monopoly, but you are serving one model, which will never be successful anyway. So you should always try to diversify offerings.
Well, Young, if people wanted to learn more about the program that you're building in China around human interdependence or your work abroad, in addition to checking out, and I didn't know we were going to get a new book out of this, Young, but Fix the Past or Invent the Future, moving beyond one size fits all education. We will certainly follow up for that conversation. But where can people find more about the work that you're doing on the ground?
You know, the best way to email me. I'm not very much into websites to promote certain things because I really believe every innovation starts with the school. So I would like to work with schools, support that. I mean, we've written this, on my website. We have articles about it, but actually, the school principal just shared this at the Digital Promise event in Shanghai with educators from several countries. So that's a lot of information. And actually, Nick, you and I might want to talk about, we could run a summer camp in the US, like what we did in China. We've been running that for 8 years in China. We always bring students from different countries. Muskegon is actually quite cool, Lake Michigan. So we could chat about that. But I mean, overall, they can just send me an email. I think it will be great. The book, Fixing the Past, Inventing the Future, has a chapter about the school within a school reform model. And by the way, we have a center at the University of Kansas called the Center for Reimagining Education. And we are working with schools in Kansas to do the similar kind of paradigm shifting changes in Kansas. And we wrote an article in Kappan, which might come out, in a couple of months, about this model.
Oh, well, I'll have to keep an eye out for that. And then I'll put all the links to emails, websites, books, the University of Kansas, all of that in the show notes for folks. But Yong Zhao, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Nick. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast at Human Restoration Project. I hope this conversation leaves you inspired and ready to start making change. If you enjoyed listening, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast player. Plus, find a whole host of free resources, writings, and other podcasts all for free on our website, humanrestorationproject.org. Thank you.